trying to stretch our resources further than we should be doing. Is our government still structured in direct relation to its strategic objectives, that is over and above its constitutional mandate? Do we have the right number of civil servants doing the kind of work that needs to be done, or are we trying to fit a square into a circle? Because in 1998 or thereabouts, we thought the government should look the way it does now. No, I'm not suggesting that we retrench people. I am asking, for instance, whether we do not spend hundreds of millions on consultants because the people we have in place aren't fit for the purpose that we have now. Then we end up paying millions of rand for work that officials should actually be able to do. How should we deliver on the social wage? Do we want to give people 370 rand to last them 48 hours, or do we want to use the 35 billion for carefully planned and executed initiatives to grow the economy and create jobs that pay a living wage? These are policy questions that cannot be answered in a speech by the finance minister alone. And these are some of the things the finance minister himself mentioned yesterday when he spoke about repurposing the SRD grant. I also want to spend a bit of time on expenditure reviews in general, and then I will sit down. Another issue the minister and I have discussed in recent months. As much as he said there is a commitment from the president and cabinet to drive efficiencies in government, this is also Parliament's job. It is a job that myself, Honorable Maimane, and Honorable Masuanganye from the National Assembly's perspective, we will take really seriously. Because as the minister said yesterday, we need to make sure that every rand goes as far as possible. Because once again, the South African people have said, no more taxes. We don't have the bandwidth. Make do with what we already give you. The government overpays for goods and services, but I want to give you an insight into a specific area of over expenditure on an industrial scale. The mismanagement of projects and the massive corruption therein. We need to set benchmarks where the government does not spend more than 100% of planned project spend. And staff are incentivized for projects that are completed on time and within budget. We cannot have civil and construction projects lasting double or triple the time at double or triple the cost that was initially planned. That is not value for money. We need to explore centralizing project management capacity and project controls. Consulting engineers, we've learned, are a massive weakness, failing to ensure that the work is of the right quality and payments are only made when the work is done, and when those payments are made, they're in line with what we should be paying. Fighting corruption is a priority the minister reaffirmed yesterday, and he will be back with us in June for this critical conversation. I want to speak a little bit about that for a couple of seconds. And that is part of the discussion prior to the March budget as well as this one. Treasury and GTEC have done extensive work over the last couple of years to understand where government should spend money better. The minister spoke about this yesterday. And therefore, I've invited him to come to the Standing Committee on Public between the finance committees, where he will lay out for 2 days, he will lay out areas where the government, since 2013-2014, has been spending money, where that expenditure has been efficient, where that expenditure has not been efficient, and what some of the critical interventions that can be made are. This is the work of Parliament. I know that whenever there is conflict, such as when there is a fight about VAT and so on, and we will hear a lot of words like austerity and that kind of thing. Ultimately, colleagues, at the end of the day, MPs have to get off Twitter, get off the streets, get to committees, and do the serious, boring work that does not offer the TV time, the drama in the afternoon offers. That is how we will serve the South African people. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Chairperson Zibi. I now wish to invite the Chairperson of the Select Committee on Appropriations in the National Council of Provinces. She also wears the cap, which of course she All right. No, this one is for Honorable Sanindlu. I was going to mention another cap that you wear as the chairperson of the Standing Committee on the Financial Management of Parliament. Honorable Lekwase, the Select Committee on Appropriation Chairperson in the NCOP.
Thank you very much, Program Director, Mr. Muthapo, colleague chairpersons in committee, in the cluster of finance committees in Parliament, stakeholders, members of the media, and parliamentary officials, good morning. I'll not be talking much on what my colleagues have already mentioned and the economic part of the budget. Rather, I'll be before you and outline to you or share with you the cycle of processing the Division of Revenue Bill, as it was also tabled by the Minister yesterday and as it is part of the work that we do as the Select Committee on Appropriations. Firstly, I would like to share with you what the bill is all about. This is one of the crucial pieces of legislation for the NCOP because its role and impact on the three spheres of government. It takes approximately 6 weeks to be processed in total, encompassing the National Assembly, the NCOP, and the provincial legislatures' public participation. And then the objective of this bill, we have 3 to 4 objectives which this bill is all about. It provides for the equitable division of national raised revenue amongst the national, the provincial, and the local spheres of government for the medium-term expenditure framework. It also determines each province's equitable share and allocations to provinces, local government from the national government's equitable share. This is the bill that outlines the responsibilities of all three spheres pursuant to such divisions and allocations, as well as other related matters. Both the Division of Revenue and Appropriations Bill allocate resources for priorities and projects outlined in the state of the pardon me. It also prioritizes the project outlined by the President in the State of the Nation address. The 6-week cycle of processing the Division of Revenue, I must indicate that the budget process does not start when the minister tables it in Parliament, but it starts with the process where Financial and Fiscal Commission's recommendations on the Division of Revenue for the upcoming financial year, as it is required by Section 4, subsection 4 of the Money Bills Act, where the minister has to consider the recommendation made by the FFC when preparing for the main budget. And in the first week after the minister has tabled the budget, the finance committees from both sides will then adopt the fiscal framework, paving the way for the committee's briefing by the National Treasury on the bill, which will be happening tomorrow on Friday at 10 o'clock. Then the relevant information will be circulated among stakeholders to ensure inclusive public participation. And once the National Assembly passes the bill, it will then be referred to our Select Committee in the NCOP, which is the Select Committee on Appropriations. After the committee is briefed by the National Treasury, permanent delegates and Select Committee on Appropriations will brief their respective provincial legislatures as required by the Mandating Procedures of Provinces Act number 52 of 2008. These briefs highlight specific areas in the proposed bill that affect respective provinces. Then on the third week, the provincial legislature will conduct its public participation processes and consider their committee reports on the bill. On the fourth week, the provincial legislatures will submit the provincial negotiating mandates to the Select Committee on Appropriations to consider during its processing of the bill. The provincial negotiating mandates contains critical issues affecting the provinces, requiring a response from the National Treasury before the committee adopts its report, and the National Treasury will be then expected to respond to each of the issues that were raised. On the fifth week after the National Treasury responds to these issues, provincial legislatures will then prepare their voting mandates, their final voting mandates, which are submitted to the committee for processing. Then the committee will consolidate and adopt the final provincial negotiating and voting mandates and will finalize the report as its bill. The last week, once the committee adopts the report, the NCOP consider and adopt the committee's report and the provincial negotiating mandates of the committees and that of provinces. The bill will then be sent to the President for assent. It is also important to note that lobbying provinces to support the bill is crucial, as the bill will only be adopted by at least 5 provinces from the 9 provinces to vote in favor for the bill to go through. The role of the Committee on Appropriations in the National Assembly is a committee that is under Section 4, subsection 4, and the committee is responsible for considering and reporting on the provincial and local government spending issues, amendments on the Division of Revenue Bill, the Appropriation Bill, supplementary appropriation bills, and adjustment appropriation bills. Recommendations of the Financial and Fiscal Commission, including those under the Intergovernmental Fiscal Relations Act. Reports on expenditure published by the National Treasury and other related matters. As mandated by the Constitution, the Money Bills Act and Mandating Procedures of Provinces Act, the committee will have to ensure that public participation by publishing advertisements in all 11 official languages through community radio stations, newspapers, Parliament's website, and other channels. Provincial legislatures are also invited to participate in public hearings during the process of the Division of Revenue Bill. We are also doing this because provincial legislatures are closer to the communities where much service delivery will be needed or is needed. To strengthen the oversight, the Committee on Appropriation will then receive briefings from the National Treasury and the Auditor General on provincial and local government conditional grants expenditure. And as a committee, we have a responsibility to ensure that resources are used efficiently and recommends interventions where it's necessary. The committee has played, I must say, since I came in as the chairperson, I can guarantee that in the previous year, the committee has really played a significant role in shaping the public finance reforms, in demonstrating that the executive must really take the recommendations from both the stakeholders and the members of the public in general into consideration when dealing with the budget. Thank you very much. Mine was just to outline the process of the bill, as will be embarking on the process as the Select Committee on Appropriations. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Honorable Passer. That is quite a very important process that you are outlining, because I know that ordinarily the media will focus on what is happening in the National Assembly and does not pay much attention to the process, comprehensive process that is also followed in the National Council of Provinces. Thank you very much for that emphasis. May I invite the Honorable Chairperson of the Select Committee on Finance in the National Council of Provinces, Honorable Ndlovu.
Thank you very much. Greetings to my fellow panelists and good morning to members of the media, stakeholders, and our parliament support staff. I'm going to touch on 2 focal points in my remark regarding the revised budget as tabled before the National Assembly yesterday. Those points are: 1, the budget allocation to local government and budget allocation to communication infrastructure projects. Firstly, let me acknowledge the inevitable position under which Minister Godongwana and his deputies, Dr. Masondo and Mr. Sarupen, found themselves in guiding the National Treasury during the process of revising the country's budget for the second time, something which all of us witnessed for the first time in the 3 decades of our democratic government.
The challenging situation where expenditure in the medium term was initially estimated to surpass the country's revenue was compounded by a runaway debt service cost as well as an increase in government expenditure in the medium term against low GDP growth, which is now revised to 1.4% in 2025. This aspect presented a tough environment within which the finance ministry and national treasury had to navigate to find some balance, and I think they succeeded. One can say that theirs was an inviable task indeed to make sure that government continues to meet its statutory obligation of delivering services to our people, such as education, health, care, social services, and welfare, as well as growing the economy through investment in infrastructure. As such, we welcome the allocation of over 1 trillion in critical infrastructure to lift economic growth prospects and improve access to basic services over the next 3 years. Over and above the need to arrest a ballooning debt service cost amounting to more than 1.2 trillion in the next 3 years, government has the urgent task to bring in the 16 million economically inactive South African rights into the mainstream of the economy. The budget allocation to local government, the Minister Gauteng went off script yesterday to acknowledge the ongoing debates about the need to reform the budget allocation to local government. This debate has been continuing for some time now, and it was raised sharply during the Presidential Local Government Summit in September 2022, where they officially resolved on the need for a review of the 1998 White Paper on local government. The summit made several diagnoses regarding inefficiencies and systemic failures in local government, thereby attributing the challenges to lack of requisite technical skills, government failures, inability to generate funds for many rural municipalities, and inadequate funding from the national fiscals, like the 5.52.7 billion that will be allocated in the next 3 years. I must indicate that at least the minister was able to increase that budget of the local government compared to 2020 to last term. In February this year, President Ramaphosa also acknowledged this matter in the State of the Nation address when he said, "We will therefore undertake extensive consultation to develop an updated white paper on local government to outline a modern and fit-for-purpose local government system. We will review the funding model of municipalities, as many of them do not have a viable and sustainable revenue base. We acknowledge that the review of budget allocation to local government is one of the priorities in the phase 2 of Operation Vulindlela, wherein government aims to improve the performance of local government. This includes professionalizing utilities, appointing suitable qualified people to senior positions, and reviewing the local government fiscal framework. As the NCOP Finance Committee, we are watching this with keen interest, the process of drafting the updated white paper on local government, because we believe that this document will form the basis upon which structural reform at the local government level ought to occur. Our people in rural areas interface with local government for their daily service delivery needs, such as water, housing, electricity, and roads, amongst others. And in most cases, the local government is found wanting in this regard. As we take this revised budget to further scrutiny through parliamentary process, we therefore call upon SALGA, the South African Local Government Association, to take a keen interest and voice their position. We also call on the Department of Corporate Governance and Traditional Affairs, the COCTA, to accelerate the process of revising the 1998 White Paper on local government. The budget allocation to communication infrastructure projects. I think I must indicate that the reason why I also indicated for me to talk on this matter is because I'm coming from the rural province, Tabazimbi, whereby there is a serious challenge of the network there. So things is something that is close to my heart. We take note that as part of more than 1 trillion investment in infrastructure projects in the medium term, government, in terms of the priorities of phase 2 of Operation Vulindlela, aims to harness digital transformation in order to drive the adoption of digital technologies in government and building digital public infrastructure for use by all South Africans. We welcome that this will be done through public-private partnership initiatives, with the regulation having been gazetted already and which are set to take effect next month. It is important to understand that acting alone, the mobile network operators ordinarily prioritize profit maximization by focusing on metropolitan areas, leaving rural municipalities completely out of service. This act denies our people meaningful participation in the digital economy, not to mention access to communication at all. There are no laws to compel mobile network operators to provide full access to quality telecommunication service to all South Africans, which is the reason why government must step in to close the gap. State-owned companies such as Broadband Infraco and the National Electronic Media Institution of South Africa, NEMISA, must be adequately funded to roll out major broadband infrastructure in rural communities. Our people must have at least one thing that is working well. You will agree with me that it is inviable to live in a place that has poor or no mobile signal and no internet access. I think most of the MPs and other stakeholders, they were able to experience, as I indicated earlier, during the by-elections. Every parties, they were there, Honorable Mayman, during the campaigns. Broadband Infraco vision is to be recognized as the provider of choice for end-to-end communication services, and this can only be realized with resources allocation for major broadband infrastructure in rural communities, so that in the absence of mobile signal, our people can at least have quality internet access. In conclusion, the nuts and bolts of this revised budget will be deliberated further in the joint meetings with the Standing Committee on Finance, led by Dr. Masongane, and the Appropriation Committee led by Honorable Mayman. The tricky part with a process that requires public consultation first before committee's deliberations is that if you state your views before consulting with the public, you risk being construed as embarking upon a consultation process with predetermined views. In other words, as they say in France, I felt accomplished. For now, let us allow the process to unfold and afford members of the public space an opportunity to give their input in the budget. And only then we shall raise our own views during the deliberation stage, informed by what the public have submitted as inputs. Thanks very much. I'm not clapping hand.
Thank you very much for that hands clapping worthy presentation, Honorable Ndlovu. I invite the last overview from the Honorable Chairperson of the Standing Committee on Appropriations in the National Assembly, Honorable Musimemane.
I need to just check whether this thing is on. Is it on? It's Sanbona Dumelang, Huemor, Molwen, Legai. No, thank you so much, and let me greet our fellow members of Parliament and members of the National Council of Provinces and the respective chairpersons of committees. And I, first of all, always welcome the opportunity that we have in being able to reflect on the budget processing, the budget inputs, and ultimately what the budget means. But yesterday was a significant day in South Africa. 2 meetings were convened, one at the ICC and the other at the White House. And I think it would be amiss of us not to understand the relationship between those two things and ask the question, what are then the budget implications as it speaks to those issues? And that's what, when you sit in appropriations, have to answer the questions that sat in the room, in both rooms yesterday, both in the White House and both at the ICC. And so, to some extent, that is in part what I will attempt to do as we go, because there are some fundamental points that are worth noting. Yesterday, the Minister of Finance announced a lower than projected growth rate over the last 3 budget cycles, which means that South Africa isn't growing. And if South Africa isn't growing, the facts are real. There's a limited opportunity to create jobs. The ultimate issue is that then the conversation about the budget becomes this second issue that Honorable Zibi reflected on, is that it becomes about taxation. And I think everybody would have gone into the first budget cycle discussing VAT. There are other types of taxation, and we spoke about personal income taxation, we spoke about corporate taxation, but we also yesterday had an introduction of the fuel levy, which is a different type of tax. All it simply does, ultimately, is that it erodes what the Reserve Bank would give in terms of inflation targeting and gives us a repo rate or reduction of that so that consumers can have more disposable income. So we can reduce the budget to a conversation about tax and miss out on some of the key indicators, of which one of them is GDP and whether South Africa is growing at the rate that it should. But I think I want to look at the third number that is hardly ever spoken about a lot, which is the gross capital formation, or in other words, how much you spend on fixed infrastructure or the level of investment that we need to have. And so then the relationship between what happened in the White House then becomes important, because if there was one mission about yesterday, it was how well do we attract investment to South Africa. Because if we don't, I think the subtle threat that the minister made yesterday is that when you look at the inner year and the outer year, which is when you talk about a medium-term budget policy statement, is that he made the statement to say, should we be able to allow SARS to grow and attract more revenue collections, then the taxes that are going to be proposed for next year then fall off the table. But I would want us to rather have a conversation about how do we shift the figure of 1.4% GDP growth, the rate of investment, so that those are higher, so that we don't have to have a conversation about tax. For it is remain ultimately true, no nation has ever taxed itself to prosperity. The president was asked yesterday a fascinating question, and his response was he spoke about the 3 top economies in Africa. He raised the fact that the 3 top economies, depending on where you take, are South Africa, Nigeria, or Egypt. If you want to answer the question whether the budget was good or bad, it may be helpful to say, compared to what? So if you compare it to those 3 economies, let's then begin to think. South Africa's rate of growth is lower. South Africa's investment, foreign direct and domestic investment, is lower for those 3 countries. But the one item that sits, and I want us to understand this, is what is the level, what drives those 2 things? Others would say it's policy, which is correct. Others would say, yes, it's investment in infrastructure. But I want to pick up a little bit about some of the conversation that took place yesterday, even at the White House, which is, do South Africans, regardless of the color of their skin, feel safe in the country? What is the rate of investment when it comes to policing? Yesterday, the Minister of Finance appropriated just over 133 billion rands that goes into policing. How is that money then going to be spent? Just under 19% of it, or just under 20% of it, will be spent on administration. The greater difficulty is that 81% of the police budget goes into personnel. So, in effect, when you ask the question, if the question was put at the White House, can I invest in South Africa, and will South Africa be a safe place for people to work and live in a country where the murder rate, compared to those 3 countries, South Africa's murder rate is double that of Nigeria, and 31 times more than that of Egypt. So if you were watching what was happening, you have to ask the question, will I invest in this country? Will my investment be safe from criminals? Will my people be safe and be saved from murder? And ultimately, will I never suffer from extortion or other types of crime? What the job of Parliament is supposed to do is to go, does the appropriation that went to policing serve the purpose of responding to that question? Because all of us must be obsessed about one thing. Can South Africa increase its rate of investment in the next year and the outer year? And so if then you conclude that 81% of the money that goes to policing goes to police personnel, only less than 3% of it goes to infrastructure build, which is being able to build new police stations, etc., etc. A limited amount of it goes to specialized units, whether it's about fighting crime in the farm or in the township. You have to say to yourself, what Parliament must do isn't just looking at spending reviews by saying, how do we get efficiency in spending? Parliament must then ask the hard questions, which is, are the programs of government sufficient enough to attract investment? And therefore, is the spending that we put, whatever rand we put, aligned to programs that help us not only improve the quality of lives of South Africans, but increase the rate of investment? So Operation Vulindlela version 2 speaks extensively about how we prioritize policing. And part of prioritizing that says, how do we take the top 200 criminals in the country, or the top number of criminals in the country, clarify a role, and commit resources towards fighting those? What I would like to see, honorable members and members of the press and fellow South Africans, is that when we think about the outer year of dealing with the budget, we can't just be adjusting for inflation year on year. We should rather be honest and say, stop the bus. Actually, if we want a safer country, are we going to fund it more? Are we going to disproportionately attack the question of murder? And are we going to then say to ourselves, our rate of conviction as far as murder is concerned will move not only from 1 in 5, but rather to a place where if you commit murder in this country, you get arrested, whether that murder takes place in whatever context. So when we reflect on the budget, fellow, we must think about it in a number of ways. And therefore, I want to highlight, as I bring this to a close, that our ultimate job is to think hard about the rate of investment. Our fundamental question must be, the intervention yesterday in the US as it pertains to attracting international and foreign direct investment, are we going to achieve the net? Because South Africa enjoys the benefit as it comes to the trade balance between us and the US. It is favorable towards us. We export a number of minerals to the US, and therefore everything that we do, whether it's about fixing infrastructure, whether it's about keeping the lights on, whether it's about keeping water flowing, must ultimately be able to improve that rate of investment. As a committee, we are taking this matter absolutely crucially. Because at one level, you can measure whether or not money is being wasted. We should equally so measure whether every rand is performing. Whether if you go to a hospital, are hospitals paying for services consumed last year, or are they spending their budget on this year? It's a fundamental question. Whether when you put R1 trillion to municipalities, are those municipalities R1 trillion in investor spend? Because investment in whether you build infrastructure doesn't happen without an address. It happens in a municipal. Are those municipalities able to ensure that the bridges are maintained, that ultimately any buildings and stock that you put on the table is going to be looked after? So my ultimate issue is that actually we should depart from looking at the budget in isolation and really begin to say, what, when we look at the appropriations bill, and the Division of Revenue Bill, do we hold all of those entities accountable to achieve the objectives we want? The mistake we could make is to do what we did with the National Development Plan, where ultimately, when you look at the NDP today, the majority of its targets are not met. The next mistake we could make is to take the medium-term development plan and say everything is a priority and fail to fund all of those priorities, which means those objectives are not going to be met. This year's budget is going to pass by the 30th of July when it's done in the NCOP. But it doesn't solve the question of what are we preparing for in the medium-term budget policy statement? What are we doing to look at the inner year, which is next year, 2026, 2027? And what are we doing in the outer year to achieve the objectives that we want? The last place we want to be as a seventh administration is to look after the 5-year term and said all we did when it came to the budget is adjusted for inflation, kept the same priorities, and we still live in a country where unemployment is high, debt is rising, which is what the IMF is projecting to get to 80% of GDP. We as an economy relative to Egypt and Nigeria are falling behind, and ultimately our infrastructure deficits are such that we ultimately don't have fundable infrastructure going forward. So as a committee, as I close, we are going to make sure that whatever the next engagement we have with any international investor or domestic investor in future, the story South Africa has to tell is that ultimately we are reviewing our expenditure to make sure it's aligned to priorities. We have a plan that is fundable. We hold the executive to account against that plan. And if there's a figure that we should all obsess about going into the medium term is whether the rate of investment, both domestically, internationally, the gross capital formation, is that number going up or down? Once we get that right, we can talk about job creation and stop taxing people to prosperity, but rather have an economy that can grow at a much higher rate so that the discussion isn't about tax increases. But I wonder whether one day we could have a discussion about tax decreases so that we can attract more investment, particularly around different types of taxes. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Chairperson Maimane. As you would have heard, ladies and gentlemen, the chairpersons of the finance cluster, all of them, they have affirmed and probably reaffirmed the fact that Parliament and its committees will indeed be able to process this budget within the legally prescribed time frame. As you know, once the Minister of Finance has tabled the budget, as he has done yesterday, the institution does consider the budget instruments, the three of them in a legally prescribed sequence. We know that the first one to be considered will be the fiscal framework, followed by the division of revenue bill, and then followed by the appropriation bill. And just to add on the very comprehensive process of the consideration and the processing that Honorable Khwase has outlined, to say that on the side of the National Assembly, and of course in terms of this sequence, the National Council of Provinces, on at least the two budget instruments will wait for the processing of the National Assembly to conclude before their process kicks in. And the institution has put the time frames and the deadlines to ensure that come the last day of July, the budget is processed and all the relevant legal budget instruments are referred to the President for assent into law. In terms of the fiscal framework, both the National Assembly and the National Council of Provinces will process that instrument on the 11th of June. Because the law says within 16 days of the tabling of the budget, the fiscal framework must be considered and voted into. In terms of the division of revenue bill in the National Assembly, the law says that within 35 days of the adoption of the fiscal framework, it must be processed by the House, and the date that has been set is the 26th of June, 2025. The National Assembly will then proceed to finalize, to consider the appropriation bill on the 23rd of July, because once the division of revenue is passed, then it paves the way for the appropriation bill to be considered by the House. In terms of the voting requirements, there are different distinct voting requirements for each of the houses, the National Assembly and the National Council of Provinces. In terms of the fiscal framework, which I said both houses will simultaneously deal with on the 11th of June. In the National Assembly, 1/3 of MPs is required to be present, and the majority of those present must vote in favor in order for the fiscal framework to pass. In the National Council of Provinces, at least 5 provinces must vote in favor, because as Honorable Lufase said, the NCOP on some of these budget instruments, they vote in accordance with the provinces, they get the mandates of the provinces. In terms of the division of revenue bill, in the National Assembly, at least 201 MPs must be present, and the majority of that must vote in favor in order to pass. The National Council of Provinces, again, at least 5 provinces must vote in favor. And then the last one, the appropriations bill, in the National Assembly, it requires a majority vote. And then in the National Council of Provinces, at least 1/3 of members must be present. This is where then the council is voting through individual members, and the majority of that number must vote in favor in order for that to be passed. Ladies and gentlemen, those are the overviews and the very comprehensive takes from the committees of the National Assembly and the National Council of Provinces that will be instrumental and at the forefront of processing the budget that was tabled yesterday. I'm going to first allow the first round, the members of the media. I know that we are joined by our valued stakeholders. You will be given the opportunity to engage with the members, but we want to take the first round first, dedicated to the members of the media. I'm just going to, I see that there is microphones here. I'm not sure if they are able to be connected to the sound there, because I want the chairperson to speak from where they are seated. They have got mics. They need to speak here. Well, the public broadcaster seems to be insisting that despite you having your own, but they did say that they can connect it here. They can connect it here. It won't work. Okay. Apologies, Honorable Chairperson. So you will just have to come here when you respond to the questions that relate to your area of work. May I then take the first round? You will be the first, Lindsay, and then you will be the second, Lulu. Third, you will be the third, the back, and then to miss anyone. There are three. This side, I don't see any hand. Okay. In that order, just mention the name of your company and your name, and then should the chairpersons will be taking notes of the questions.
Good morning. Thank you, Maloto. Lindsay Dentlinger, Eyewitness News. My first question to Chairperson Maswangai. You would obviously want to avoid the kind of chaotic scenes we saw play out during your committee's processing of the fiscal framework. What, if anything, might you be doing differently this time around to ensure that that process is above reproach? Secondly, I'm not quite sure which, I understand this question is not directly within the ambit of the chairpersons who are here, but anybody who would respond. While the fuel levy might be the lesser of the tax evils, if you will, Chairperson Maswangai did mention, or might have been Mr. Zibi, the increase on transport costs. So it is going to hit poor people. Inevitably, we are going to see transport costs go up, given what average households spend. Repeatedly, there have been talks about a fuel structure review. I think the President made another such announcement last year, July. What pressure, if any, can any of these committees put on the relevant portfolio and those involved to see that that review is done, and what it's going to yield? It has knock-on effects on the road accident fund, which I know Mr. Zibi deals with regularly, but what can any of these committees do to make sure that this review is done, and whether it can be determined whether this fuel levy is necessary? Yeah, and I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lindsay. Lulu.
Lula Mamatya, SABC. To the Chairperson of Finance as well as Appropriations. Last budget 2.0 was passed by the National Assembly despite we hear those that are against the fuel levy increase. Are we likely, my question is, are we likely gonna see a time whereby the budget is rejected at committee level due to submissions from the public than what we've seen last time? Because it was passed despite objections, it was reversed at a later stage, the 0.5 percentage point. Are we really likely to see a period whereby the budget will be rejected at committee level than going to the House and being passed? Thanks.
Thank you very much, Lulu.
Morning, everyone. Naida Ibrahim from News 24 Business. I just wanted to ask about, obviously, Parliament has until the 31st of July to pass the relevant budget and its legislation, because on the 1st of August, government will only be able to use 10% of its previous provisional allocations in the previous budget. So I just wanted to ask whether the chairpersons can affirm the South African public the government will not be able to run out of money by that time, and that Parliament will do what it can to pass the legislation in that time, because I'm sure that we all know that government departments cannot pay all of their suppliers with only 10% of their previous budget. And I just wanted to ask, obviously from your sides, whether, I know that in the previous budget the VAT increase and the VAT hike proposal was a source of contention. Will the relevant chairpersons make sure that there's no political infighting to ensure that the budget and its relevant legislation can be passed in time? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I see that there are specific questions to the Standing Committee on Finance, SCOPA, Standing Committee on Appropriations, and the last question goes to all the chairpersons. So I will just leave it to your discretion on how you will deal with them. May I just call in this order the chairperson of the Standing Committee on Finance, followed by Standing Committee on Appropriations, and then SCOPA, and then the select committees in terms of, in respect of the last question. Thank you.
Thank you, Program Director. Let me indicate that Parliament is run in terms of the laws of the Republic, the Constitution, the legislations that are there, and the rules of the National Assembly. When we have a joint sitting, we also have what we call the joint rules of the two houses. So if a member decides to be chaotic in an assembly, it's up to him. And the presiding officer will have to call that member to order. And the same applies if a member decides to be chaotic in a committee meeting. It's our responsibility to bring that member to order as chairperson. The last meeting of the select and the standing committee was not chaotic. Members who were representing their political parties were raising views with the mandate of their political parties. And that meeting voted for a fiscal framework report. The majority voted. If other members were not happy, it's up to them. They have to win elections next time. That's the rule of the game. You have to have the majority. And the same applies to the National Assembly that was held the following day. Whether some went to court or not, that's neither here nor there. The fact of the matter is that the National Assembly adopted the fiscal framework report on that day. So that's how we run Parliament. Regarding issues of tax and fuel levy in particular, the Minister alluded to the fact that there has never been an increase on the fuel levy for 3 years. Let me indicate that we should not promote a situation where we don't want the public and the corporate to pay taxes. It will not be right that every time the state talks about increasing a tax, we encourage protest. You are not going to run a state based on populism, because there's no state that can function without revenue. Otherwise, if you want to run the government and the state in general based on populism, that you will never raise a tax and you'll never do this, at some state, that state is going to collapse. It is very important that we understand that taxation enables government to fund essential public goods. The minister spoke about increasing the education budget to $1 trillion plus. Where will that trillion come from if it does not come from revenue, which ourselves, those of us who are working, have to contribute through PIT. Corporates have to contribute through CIT, customs, and so on. Provinces have to receive more, 2.4 trillion. Next year, we have to fund for local government elections, which is going to be 1.4 billion. Funding the elections, including the security cluster. So these are some of the issues that we have to ask ourselves. And not that every time that we talk about taxation, we say, no, why should people pay tax? Citizens and corporates have got the responsibility to pay tax to fund for public services, infrastructure, health services, education services, economic stability, support economic growth, as well as state functionality. So those are the things that are quite important. It will be important that in running public education, we also have to explain to the public why taxes are important. All of us want SARS to get more funding, plus 7 billion rand over the medium term. Why? Amongst other things, is because people are not complying. Why are people and corporates not voluntarily paying taxes? And you have to allocate more resources to a taxation institution called SARS to make people to comply, and companies that are running a business over the digital platform not complying. We have to modernize SARS to make sure that it is up to speed with the modern way of collecting revenue. So those are the things that we are looking at. We understand the implications, but it is also mitigated. The minister spoke about putting more money on transport, and in this regard, on the railway system, the commuter rail, to try by all means that, because commuter rail is highly subsidized and is quite cheaper compared to other mode of transportation in South Africa. So the more you have commuter rails back on the railway lines, the more you have the poor, the working class and the workers using that mode of transport, which is quite cheaper. And they will not spend 50% plus on transport. They will spend much lesser. And you have to understand that why are workers spending so much money on transport? It's because of the legacy of apartheid. The apartheid special framework was that you have got poor staying far away from towns. And that is a legacy up to today. And it's not going to end in the few years to come. That's what we have to live with. You have to understand that it was deliberate that whites stay in town, coloreds and Indians stay in the outskirts, blacks stay far away. In between, there will be a railway line, there will be an industrial buffer. You have to study what the planning was all about. And we're trying to deal with that to try to subsidize transport. Of course, even the taxi industry is raising the issue. Why are you not subsidizing them? And I think that's a matter that the Minister of Transport and the colleagues in cabinet will have to look at, because buses are subsidized, trains are subsidized, but taxis are not subsidized. It's a matter for debate, including us who are legislators seated here. Thanks very much, Program Director.
Thank you. I mean, Lindsay, I think the question about the road accident fund, etc., will go to Honorable Zibi. Suffice to say that I think the process of reviewing must be paramount. There have been a number of things that have gone into the review. I know certainly in the Energy Portfolio Committee that I sometimes have to go to. There's been a conversation that's taking place. The one aspect that we've got to think about, and I think Honorable Maswanganye raises a very important point. As legislators, we've got two jobs. We have constituencies we have to represent, but then we have the trusteeship of the country's resources. And so my positives I take away from yesterday's budget was that the minister was operating within a very constrained wiggle room. And the second point with all of that is that the one cushion that we can at least still rely on is, and we'll see the data as it comes out in the next MPC meeting, is that inflation is relatively low. So whilst the introduction of a fuel levy will put stress on that inflationary target across the board, because it's not just the poor in that sense of what transport goods and all of that, it also is the input costs of any type of production you run in the country. Also, given the fact that when you look at ESCOM, their consumption of diesel, etc., then is increasing. So all of these input costs add up and add to that inflationary burden that then is passed on to the consumer. I think we need to really review how we look at that fuel price. And therefore, I certainly will raise that question even with the Minister of Finance tomorrow. The only other point I want to make is that the biggest component of fuel is obviously the dollar-priced oil pricing that sits within it. So the sooner we actually ensure that we have a strengthening currency and benefit, some of the benefit that we've seen, part of the inflationary pressure that's reduced has been in some ways the weakening of the dollar, not the strengthening of the rand. We've got to ensure that our trade balance is stronger. And therefore, I cannot stress enough the importance of attracting foreign direct investment. Because part of that is about having a stronger currency to ensure that actually your currency, your stronger investment, so that your currency isn't that weak, so that actually your purchasing power on oil is actually a lot lower, which will help with the fuel price. And we've started, as the rand has been strengthening, we've also seen the reduction in the fuel costs. Now what we've got to do is continue on that trajectory. And part of it is about making sure Kaizer Chiefs keep winning, because it's common cause that when Chiefs win, the rand strengthens.
10 years. 10 years.
And you saw when they drew, then you saw the rand start to take up again. So yesterday, I think the rand was trading at below 18, if I'm not mistaken. So I think strengthening that over a period of time is an important place. Keeping in mind when President Ramaphosa took over presidency, I think the rand was trading at 12. So we've got to make sure that we strengthen our currency. It'll help much more. I think you asked the question about passing the budget. I think it will pass. I can give that assurance. I think there's political will to make sure it passes. I don't think there's a single party that wants to see the drama of the last number of months. And so my job, even in the appropriations committee, is working with the respective parties to go. And I think, Lula, my question is important. Will we see it rejected? I think the question that we've got to also keep asking, and I can't say it for this financial year, but I think for the next financial year, the inner year and the outer year, because Parliament's capacity to, rather than asking the question, should we reject, the question should we amend? Because the rejection of a budget triggers off a number of dire situations. So just as a point of correction, it's 45%, then 10%. So if after July, we go to 45%, and then we go to 10% eventually. And that's a picture nobody wants to see. So rather than seeing that picture, we should rather see a picture that says, how do we amend the budget consistent with the Money Bills and Related Matters Act? And the way to do that is to obsess not about the current financial year, about the inner year, the middle year, and the outer year. Because when you're looking towards the outer year, post the BRRR process, the minister in the medium-term budget policy statement can make announcements that go into the following year, and then we can begin to really think what adjustments we need to make. And so even from a committee point of view, I'm asking our committee members to say, 2025, 2026, almost that ship has sailed. Now we've got to think hard about what those 2 years look like. So to your point about what citizens reject, how citizens object to certain things, the best way we can give voice to that is to amend in the medium term and over the outer years, because I think there's an opportunity to do so. And I think the Money Bills and Related Matters Act, which is something that I've recommended even to the Speaker, that its timelines need to be adjusted so as to give Parliament the power to do so, and to add capacity to the Parliament's budget office so that appropriate research is done, the right data inputs are done, so that we can give full effect to that law. And I'm not sure we'll be able to do that this year. And in the absence of being able to do that, let's just make sure that at least in the years that come after that, we'll be able to achieve that. So I think other than I totally agree with you on the transport issue, and I stand with Honorable Maswanganye. The other work that we've got to do is deconcentrate economic activity. And that's why part of it is about moving work opportunities closer to people. So one of the welcome things I see as part of Operation Vulindlela is to digitize and give digital infrastructure, because there's no reason why you cannot run a call center in historically a township deemed so under a historical legacy issue. There should be no reason why I can't put a call center in Gugulethu. Absolutely none. Which means that actually I can ensure that people work, live, and play closer to where they work. I totally endorse the view that let's reduce the cost of transport for people, so that actually when you introduce rail and signaling, it'll alleviate that cost. That is true for most cities, whether London or anywhere else. But I really do think part of the future of work is about making sure that actually, thanks to technology, thanks to digitization, we can bring economic activity like call centers, like any other, closer to where people work, live, and play, so that we can cushion that cost in the long run.
Thank you very much. I see the road accident fund question was given to me, so I consider myself firmly under the bus. I just want to, Lindsay, thank you very much for that question, because I think when we look at budgets, one issue at a time, we almost will never make the right decision. So let me give some numbers from yesterday, because, you know, finance ministers have to give a positive spin to things. So there's some serious reductions that have taken place. In March, the allocation for basic education was 29 billion. The additional allocation was 29 billion over the medium term. It's now 19.55 billion. Right? About 10 billion down. Health was 29 billion. It's now 20.77 billion. Infrastructure, the critical infrastructure that I spoke about earlier, roads, bridges, and so on, it was 46 billion, now it's 33.75 billion. For PRASA, you know, when the minister yesterday spoke about people getting a train every 15 minutes, in March that number was a train every 5 minutes at peak time. The investment then was 19 billion, it's been cut to 12 billion. I won't go through the whole list. Here's the point I want to make. The question about VAT fundamentally was about how much money do we allocate for these problems? Do you want to give the government more, or do you want to give the government less? And the view was the government should get less money. That's the impact. So the question, Lindsay, really is not about the fuel levy. Is how much less do you want to give the government? Which of these things must we continue to cut? We can always cut taxes. But there is another problem, which is the outcome of South Africa's structural problems. You see, so we're all happy when the fuel levy does. I have a car, so I'm happy when the fuel levy doesn't go. I really am, right? And it also affects me in other ways. Relatives that I support that have to use taxis and that kind of thing. So I totally get it. But also there are people who get involved in accidents. and they need the road accident fund to be able to pay them out. They wait longer, or they never get paid. How many people do we want to wait longer or never get paid? That's the question. There are other problems. You remember load shedding. So we don't want SOCs to get bailouts, all good. So one of the things Parliament, Honorable Maswanganyi, he was in the Finance Committee actually previously as well, and other members of Parliament. And the government decided that because companies spend so much money on diesel, on generators, we're going to allow them to claim some of that diesel refund back. So even as the money is collected, some of it gets given back to various taxpayers because we've got other problems elsewhere in the economy, right? Fixed load shedding, you no longer have to pay the money back in diesel rebates, right? So you need to fix a whole lot of other problems to get to a point where you stop the fiscal leakage and money can begin to go to the right things. By the way, the other reduction is money meant for municipalities to turn them around and so on. That's also been reduced. You know that initiative to bring a younger, better qualified people, that early retirement scheme for people 55 and above, it's lost 5.5 billion. So you're going to bring less people over time. So when you strip the financial language and the careful language of the finance minister, you get to those bare bones. Here's the question around the question of cost of transport and so on. How much longer should people who should be using a cheap train wait for one? How much longer? So Honorable Maswanganyi is right. I wouldn't put it the way that he has, but he is correct in the sense that we have to fund our government. And in my answer, I will therefore say there are two pillars to this. There must be short-term pain that we accept as part of resourcing the doing of the things that we say the government needs to do. But there must also be this work that I spoke about expenditure reviews. Are we wasting money? Yes. Are we not holding people accountable for wasting money? No, we aren't. Are we overpaying for goods and services? Yes, we're overpaying for goods and services as the government. The government pays up to 45% more to rent offices. Projects take, Ministers Kwakube made an example about a Curo school that costs 55 million rand. The government pays 150 million for the same school, and it got fewer things for the same type of facility. So the point I'm making is this. We have to do the work of releasing funds that are stuck in inefficiencies and incompetence and poor planning and that sort of thing, so that those funds can go to what Honorable Maimane was saying is gross fixed capital formation, which is investing in the things that are going to fix the economy, investing in ports, investing in rail, investing in Wi-Fi and other technologies and so on. We unfortunately have to do both, and I think we need to kind of strike a balance. I also need to say something outside of my role as chair of the Standing Committee on Public Accounts, but which is helpful for this question because there's very little time left to pass the budget. And that is part of the consultation that the finance minister did was with all the GNU leaders together. And he gave a very detailed presentation of what is in this budget. I can tell you, unless something changed this morning, subject to the amendments that Parliament has to make as part of the appropriations process and so on, the parties in the GNU will support the budget, ultimately. So it will pass. We will not have this scenario where the budget doesn't pass. I hope Mr. Moloto doesn't kill me for straying out, but I felt this is important to say because we'll get to a point where if we are irresponsible, then we'll get to a point where people are not going to get paid their salaries. And I don't think we should get there.
No, thank you very much. I won't kill you for stating the most important fact, Honorable Chair. The budget will pass. And of course, there are provision in an event that the institution does not process the budget within the stipulated period. But the most important emphasis here is that it will pass. The law does specify that up to 45% of the previous year's appropriations may be used before the passage of the new budget. So once the new budget is approved, expenditure is adjusted accordingly, and there is no obligation for departments to repay amounts already spent. However, all expenditure must eventually align with the final budget framework adopted by the institution. I just wanted to deal with that because there was a question that was asked regarding that. But with 2 months and a couple of weeks remaining, or 1 week remaining, the institution, like we have said, has put in place very strict timeframes, which will be followed by both the committees of both houses and the houses to ensure that the budget passes. There's no other way. Thank you very much. Can we take then the last round? Stakeholders, if there's any. I'm going to start this side. Just come in the order. You'll be the first, be the second. Are there any stakeholders? You are the media stakeholder. You'll be the third. And then this side, are there any? The chairperson of our Sevenzi, Nehau. Welcome, together with the secretary of Nehau, the director of the budget office, parliamentary budget office, an independent advisory body of parliament. Any other? The director of the budget office was saying that he's catching stray bullets from and I said that you've got a right of reply. Just on a lighter note. On a lighter note. Okay, that will be the second and the last round in that order. Just mention your name and then the organization that you are representing.
Good morning, Chloe van Ballon from the Alternative Information and Development Center. The release of the quarterly labor force survey last week revealed that unemployment has actually become worse since the launch of phase 1 of Operation Vulindlela until its completion. So I wanted to ask that despite 500 billion rand investment in this program, why phase 1 has not managed to decrease unemployment?
Okay.
Thanks. I am Alia Chikta from the Budget Justice Coalition. So there are over 100,000 vacancies in the public sector, with the majority being concentrated in health and education. And these are jobs which are readily available and can be used to address some of the problems of mass unemployment. For example, in health, we should be employing 3 times the number of doctors that we do, according to the World Health Organization. The doctor-to-people ratio is 1 to 1,000, but we have 0.31 to 1,000, so we should be employing 3 times as many people. And given that the above inflation increases to health and education in this budget are not enough to reverse years of austerity, is there a danger that the proposed fiscal anchor will create a further mismatch between expenditure and the ability of the state to fulfill its constitutional obligations and to restore public services? Thanks.
Thank you. Lindsay?
Thank you, Manoto. Sorry for being indulgent again. Again, to any of the committee chairs. Yesterday in a briefing with journalists, the finance minister said that these budget processes that we've gone through over the last 3 months have shown that it's not as easy to amend a budget when it comes to parliament as some political parties might have thought. They could make sweeping changes once these documents arrived in the various committees. Do any of you share the view that perhaps the parliamentary process or the legislative process is quite cumbersome and that it is harder for political parties to want to impose their will on a budget document once it arrives in Parliament? Thanks.
Thank you. Nihao?
Thank you very much, Mr. Mloto. And I want to greet the chairpersons of various committees of Parliament, the finance cluster in particular. I also want to greet various stakeholders that are here with us. And lastly, I want to greet the employees of Parliament that are here, in particular those from the Parliament Communication Services. I understand the fact that it was a difficult task. My name is Tembis Dembe, chairperson of Nehao in Parliament. I understand the difficult task that the government and Minister of Finance were faced with in trying to present the balanced budget. It was not an easy task. But I want to reiterate the fact that the increase of the fuel levy will bring some hardships to the working class in particular and poor. Because the increase of the fuel levy automatically increase the transportation cost, it increases the food cost as well. So it does not resolve the problem, but I also understand that, because even when I can't think of any solution that could have been better than this. But I'm saying the increase of this particular levy is not going to make the lives of the workers and poor easy. And I want to agree with the Honorable Maimane that perhaps we must focus more on job creation and focus more in attracting foreign direct investment, which will help to increase the employment opportunities for the citizens of this country. Because what is happening is that the number of the working force is not increasing. It means we'll keep on taxing, the working employees, and we'll tax them hard because we need more money. But the number of the workforce is not increasing. But if we can attract foreign direct investment, if we can create employment opportunities, I think it will assist to ensure that even when the tax is increased, is not increased that much because it will be shared amongst the increased working force. Secondly, I don't know at what point the tax industry is going to pay taxes themselves. And I think at some point they need to pay tax because they're making money on a daily basis. They don't pay. Maybe one of the means we can use to increase the pool of people that are going to pay tax is to look at the tax industry as well. I know how difficult it is. But at some point, the government must stand up and say they need to pay because they're making money, they're making profit like all of us who are working. Secondly, we do have churches, that more especially those that are owned by foreign nationals in this country. And some of them are involved in money laundering. A lot of money there, in terms of donations. A lot of money is exchanging hands there. They don't pay taxes. Maybe we also need to look at the spaza shops. That 90 plane next to Parliament, I don't know how many spaza shops are owned by foreign nationals. And by saying that, I'm not xenophobic, but it's a fact that they are making money. At some point, if they're not paying tax, at some point, maybe we need to ensure that they pay tax, because in Western Cape alone, how much we can collect if we can, decide that they must pay tax, and it will be more in the whole country. Those are things that I want to propose to say, maybe let's look at other means that will ensure that we get more people to pay tax, such as increasing employment opportunities, but also to ensure that those that are supposed to pay tax that can assist, we make them to account and pay tax as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sihlalo. Is there a question from virtual platform? Masuku? Ebale. I could also bala. Move microphone.
Thank you. The question is from Kopolo Sewe in the small rural municipality of Maludwa-Phofung, Qwaqwa, Free State Province, and says, I just want to ask the chairperson of finance, isn't there a possibility that we can also have a finance youth desk that can be responsible for taking the views and ideas of young people around the country? As I personally feel like there are many young people who have many ideas that can assist our country, including those at universities who are doing their research paper on such issues.
Thank you very much. Let me also recognize the presence also of Mr. Henry McGregor, who is the head of Parliament Treasury Advice, Budget Advice, Treasury Advice. So, yes. PBO Director, you want to say something before the chairpersons respond? After the chairpersons.
No, thank you. Good morning, Chairperson.
You know, PBO Director that normally doesn't take my instructions. Thank you for thank you for backing me up. The whole cluster of finance is backing up me. Is backing me up against you.
Good morning, Chairperson. Good morning, colleagues. Good morning. Thank you so much. No, I think what I meant to say is that I want to respond to a question, but I didn't want to respond over the chairpersons. That's what I want to say. Maybe they'll respond to it, But anyway, I think the point I wanted to talk to was around the question on whether can Parliament amend budget. And I'm quite concerned that, the money, well, the reason why I want to talk to the point is that I feel Budget Office have some level of custodianship to the Money Bills Act. So, that's why I feel like I should respond to that point. And I think, in my view, Parliament has authority to amend the budget. And that should always be a clear message put out. And I think we've said it a lot of times. There are roles that support Parliament in that process. And it will be concerning to hear debate outside Parliament that Parliament doesn't have authority or it cannot do it. But the Act is very clear, the Constitution is very clear. Parliament has authority to amend the budget. It's just an issue of, obviously, debate, and it's a policy issue. And I think I'm quite careful how I say this, because I know it's a political statement. But I wanted to just, from a technical perspective, the Parliament should be able to amend the budget, even before we've said it a lot of times. Thank you so much.
No, thank you very much for asserting that legal fact, Director. I think the same way you dealt with the first in that order, starting with you, Honorable Chair Maswanga.
Thank you, Program Director. There are a number of questions. I think we'll share them with colleagues here. The legislative process, which is cumbersome. I think the Professor Jankis has dealt with that we can amend budget. At the end is legislation of Parliament. So like any other legislation, it can be amended. And members of Parliament have been taken through a rigorous workshop on how to process legislation. And they are also taken through courses at the University of Johannesburg and Witwatersrand up to a master's level. So they are fully conversant about the legislative process. In terms of Operation Vulindlela, we believe that the second phase should achieve more. We are not saying that the first phase didn't. It did to a certain extent, but there were challenges of operations in terms of first phase, insufficient progress. But the pace of reform was slower than expected. And the second phase should be able to address structural challenges, more especially at local government, because we can do whatever here at the national level, pass budget, say this and that. At the end, we must have a functional local government, because that's where all of us are. Water is delivered by local government, electricity, roads, and other services that we are talking about. And we believe that the second phase of Operation Vulindlela should try by all means to strengthen that third sphere of government. There are issues asked by or raised by Nehao, more especially on the tax collection. The minister and SARS have committed themselves that from 2026 there will be more tax collections, and we believe that that will relieve the taxpayers from having more tax increases. By investing in modernization of SARS, it will assist in terms of tax compliance. Make sure that this is Joe Maswangai. It will take you to have an understanding of AI that no, this thing looks artificial. But that's what technology is all about. So SARS also have to move at the speed of AI, and the 7 billion that we are allocating as Parliament to SARS over the next 3 years will assist in this regard. Combating the illicit economy that you are talking about, whether it's spaza shops, and the Minister of COGTA has issued out guidelines that all spaza shops should be registered. I don't have to go into details in that regard. No one should operate illegal in this country. We are a rules-based country. Broadening the tax base, as they've actually promised. Tomorrow, the Commissioner of SARS will come with the Minister of Finance to brief the committees at Good Hope Chamber. So those of you who will be there, who will still be around, you are invited to come to listen to them. They will talk in details about how they will deal with the issue of modernization and compliance. So, of course, from Maluta Perform, as Parliament, from time to time, if I'm not mistaken, Mlot, we do have a platform called Youth Parliament, where young people, I think in the month of June, are invited in various legislatures in provinces and also here at the National Parliament to come and participate in the activities of legislatures. And when we call for public hearings, we do try by all means to reach out to constituencies, and young people and students are very critical because they are the future of this country. At some stage, we invited organizations here in the Western Cape that are looking after children. I can't remember what they are called, but they are NGOs. They came for public hearings, and they came with children who came and spoke for themselves. We created a platform where it was conducive for children to speak at that public hearing without fear. So we'll call upon structures of youth out there to make sure that they participate in the decision-making of Parliament. Yes, let me stop there. Thanks, Program.
I'll be quick.
I think I don't disagree with the PBO director that legislatively Parliament is empowered to amend, reject, or make submissions into the budget. Part of that process means when you read the budget book itself, the minister, in fact, one of the annexures that were tabled yesterday were responses that come from the Minister of Finance about some of the recommendations that go. The difficulty, and that's why I speak about this inner year and the outer year, is the time frames. If I want to say more money must be appropriated to education, give that as a practical example. I think that we're wasting money on SETAs. There's a question here that was asked about employment. I think SETAs are a waste of time, so we need to rethink that whole SETA model. But if you want to do that, already we are under pressure to make sure the budget is passed by the 30th of July. If I want to make adjustments to education, the law prescribes I need to inform the Minister of Finance. They have the right to respond. They have to have implications because money has to be moved from one program to another, which means I've got to give 10 days to education to respond. All of that time means that the Money Bills and Related Matters Act must be strengthened even more so that we can expand the time so that allocations that sit within the Money Bills Act can be fulfilled. So these are some of the, so in practical terms, what do we do to be able to ensure that we amend? That's why I can assure you we'll be working hard at making sure that even in the medium-term budget policy statement, in my discussions with the Minister of Finance, how do we make the adjustments that come from Parliament? Because people are only represented in Parliament, they're not represented in any other structure. So I'm just reflecting on the practicality of the issue. The question about health, and I hear the point you are making in terms of how the budget around health has been seen. But I can't de-link it to what is appropriated, but let alone this. You know, when Honorable Maswanganye and Honorable Zibi say debt is 1.2 billion rands per day, and it rolls off the tongue, I think, let me put it differently. The highest function as far as budget allocation, we spend more on learning and culture functions. Second to that is debt servicing costs. If you removed culture out of the learning and culture function and just made it learning, in actual fact, then debt is the highest expenditure that South Africa meets. If you want to fund NHI or you want to fund any other program, health appropriation must be higher than even that. So, how do you then have it? How do you increase the wiggle room to make sure that there's appropriate funding that can go into healthcare so that you can achieve some of the what is deemed austerity and whatever, to make sure you meet the health objectives that you are trying to hit? So what I would urge for, and I feel like a drum, and I will beat the drum over, unless we see GDP growth, unless we see ultimately the increase in investment in South Africa, the envelope that the minister talks about is insufficient to meet all the priorities that are laid out. And the worry we should all be worrying about every day is that the decreases in the amounts that were allocated for increases in education and healthcare, the more those get cut, the bottom line is simply this. In quintile 1, 2, and 3, when you look at the rate of teacher to pupil ratio, it's 1 to 34 on average. That will continue to increase. It's the bottom line. When you look at the rate of doctor to patient ratio, compared to other parts of the world, we are lower. So those are the basic facts. So for me, we can debate how we got here, and we can say state capture, you can talk about all sorts of things. But I think we need to look forward and say, what do we need to do and what are some of the difficulties? We are making choices. The budget is also an expression of choices. And in some ways, while my leader from Nehau is correct in the points they raise, the other truth of the matter that's put in the budget is that public sector wage was a multi-year deal of above 5%. So, in a multi-year wage deal, it is super expensive in the first year because inflation is below 3%. GDP growth last year, despite the lowest number of days we had in load shedding, only delivered 0.6% growth last year. So if in the public sector you are working, you are getting an above inflation increase in a multi-year deal against lower inflation and poor GDP growth. That is a choice. Would a different perspective on that choice come in? That's a debate we must have. But it's underpinned when you look at the fact that for every R1 that comes into the fiscus, 22 cents of it goes to debt, 38 cents of it goes to cost of employees, and the remainder almost goes to social welfare, which in essence means that your ability to fund for infrastructure then becomes curtailed, let alone new projects that must go on to that. South Africa, you see, even when people talk about debt to GDP, we might have a view on that. But I would argue the case that there are other economies that have got a higher debt ratios. But what they manage to do is by using growth, they're able to meet their debt obligations, but ensure that they can finance other projects that speak to aspects of growth. So whether we like it or not, that is the debate on the table. I really believe we can debate taxation, we can debate all of that. And as I've already alluded to, that debt is crowding out any other growth. And we have seen it rapidly increase. The IMF is projecting 80% to GDP is when the debt South Africa will peak at. I welcome that the minister is talking about a 77 odd percentage point peak. My concern with that is that it is not growing because we are borrowing more. It is growing because our GDP growth is less than anticipated. And when you do that, as a proportion, it will keep increasing. So the facts on the table are, unless you grow, we can't create jobs. And ultimately, we will keep having a circuitous discussion about tax and other taxes until we really, as South Africa, focus on growth. I feel like I can't beat that drum enough. And it comes from investment and it comes from other parts. I think the other questions are for other members that we need to look at. And I agree, I think the member who spoke about even the quarterly labor force survey, I mean, the disturbing fact is that if you are 25 to 35 and the rate of unemployment there is as high as it is, I looked at those stats and asked myself the question, what was I doing at 25? And if you can't find a job at 25, your probability of working ever in your life decreases significantly. So what we do know is the fact that the unemployed generally are unskilled, or another way of saying it is unemployable. So when you've got the majority of people who are not working having a qualification less than a matric, then to my earlier point in my inputs, we need to look at the education appropriation and ask the question, if we give you money to take 100% of the children from grade 1 to matric, why are only 60% of them writing matric? What happens to those 40%? Or do we ultimately fulfill the dream that townships become dormitories of unemployment? So for me, yes, this is a finance cluster briefing. And the difficulty with finance is that it touches on everything. But the pain that we've got to solve for is to sit down as a country and say, what are our ultimate objectives? What is our macro plan? How do we fund for it? What choices do we have to make once we begin funding so that we know if we said we'll fund this SRD and we end it next year, that's a policy choice. What are we going to use that money for as an alternative so that we can say, when we talk about South Africa of 2030 or 2035, this is the society we want to see and we will fund ourselves towards it. If the GNU or any other form of government doesn't have that conversation, honestly, we are asking a lot of any Minister of Finance, because we are just simply asking them to listen to multiple inputs, multiple priorities, and try and juggle and make sure that we can plug holes. But in fact, we're not growing, let alone creating the South Africa we want to see. So I would urge that perhaps part of what the Minister of Finance whispered under his breath as some of the priorities that might come in the second half of the year, the national dialogue conversation that gives us some of those goals is going to be paramount. Otherwise, why do I sacrifice paying personal income tax or fuel levy if I don't know that that money is being used responsibly, and let alone not only just responsibly, but to achieve the South Africa we want to see? That's got to be the hard work that we do. Thanks.
Thank you, Honorable Maimane. I'm just going to deal with maybe a couple of matters of principle and policy, because I think we also have to recognize the careful balance that our Constitution asks us to achieve, and the importance of having politicians who take their work seriously. So, when I was speaking here earlier, and I'm really happy that Professor Yankis made the intervention that he did, I said, subject to any amendments Parliament will make to the budget, the parties in the GNU will support it. That was deliberate, because Parliament has a responsibility to make those kind of decisions. And so thank you for that intervention. But we must also think very carefully about how much further, and this is not what Professor Yankis was doing. I'm now talking about the public discussion in general and some of the discussion in Parliament itself. There is a careful balance that must be struck between Parliament and the Finance Minister in as far as setting tax rates. You don't want politicians alone to decide what the tax rate must be. Let me explain why. By a show of hands, in an election year, politicians may decide the corporate income tax rate must be 50% and the personal income tax rate must be 15%. We are all happy for a short while until our brothers and sisters start getting retrenched. So, you can't resolve the question of separation of powers in black and white all the time. You always need the two branches of government to work very well together and maintain that balance. The finance minister must bring proposals to Parliament which are actionable, and Parliament should also not use its power arbitrarily to arrive at outcomes which are detrimental. So we must watch the debate that's going to take place very carefully, because I can tell you there will be members of the House who will make such propositions. We can't have that. We really cannot have that. So this is a very important moment in the evolution and development of our democracy. That is the first thing I want to say. The second thing that I want to talk to is the importance of getting the entire government working. Municipalities are a disaster. Every business is in a municipality. Every business is in a municipality. We have been tasked by the Speaker and the Auditor General to look into municipalities that have not even submitted their financial reports. People get paid in those municipalities to do a job that they do not do. So there are elements in which our democracy then is also broken, and it's got a direct impact in the sense that the government has to provide money, national government, that municipalities should be able to produce on their own. Because debt collection on average is about 7 months. And the collection rate is about 30%, and it's a metro, which means it's not functioning. So the point I want to make is this. I really hope that out of this entire impasse that we've had, MPs understand that budget is not an event. It's the work we do throughout the year in order to make sure that over time we get better budget outcomes. These labels, austerity, traitors, this or that, are unserious. Are unserious because they are from people who are not interested in actually doing the boring work of solving the problem. The final thing I want to speak to is what you spoke about the resourcing that government gets. And let me give you an example of the kind of choices we make that kill people. So I've got 3 health workers in my family. One is a urologist. He worked in the Gauteng hospital complex. He would share emails with me. He had a patient who had a kidney problem, and they needed to drain fluid from the patient's kidneys. They didn't have the needle that they need to drain that for 3 weeks. The patient died. He has many such stories. The budget of the Department of Health in the Eastern Cape runs out in October each year. The only thing they can do after that is to pay salaries. Yet we make other decisions that hold up resources elsewhere, which is we choose to own 100% of the risk in Transnet, in PRASA, in everything else, so that taxpayers, whenever there is a problem, they have to stamp up hundreds of billions while people are dying. I'm not saying let us sell these entities. I'm saying, could we consider a 60% ownership by the government? 60%. 60. Free that money to save people's lives. What do people do? People say we must own 100% of everything, go and borrow limitlessly, eventually spend 4 billion rand a day servicing debt. Those are the choices that we make, and parliamentarians don't want to deal with them. That is why budgeting has to be an all-year exercise, and we cannot have ideological sentiments when people are dying, because that's what South Africa chooses to do. So what I'm trying to say is, let's also pay careful attention to this expenditure reviews program that the finance minister spoke about, because part of that, we're going to look at policy choices that do not yield the result that we assume they do. It's very important that we do that. Employers pay billions upon billions of rand to the national skills, in terms of the national skills levy. Honorable Maimane is talking about people that are unemployable because they've got no skills. So what are we doing with that money? Should we really continue with that thing in that way? I'm not saying cancel the skills levy. I'm saying, are we using it in the right way? Why is it not producing the outcome? That's the conversation Parliament has to have throughout the year, so that in February next year, as a product of those conversations, the finance minister says, I'm working together with the Minister of Labour and Employment and the Minister of Higher Education on these reforms. This is how much going to allocate for it, and this is going to be the outcome. That's better budgeting than the kind of conversation we have now. We've taken up too much time, Mr. Muller.
Facilities, education institutions, and the welfare institutions that rely on government for payment. We are proud that our recent investment conference held 2 months ago was a resounding success. We're targeting to raise 300 billion rands. We managed to raise 320 billion rands. These are companies that cut across our continent, but majority of them comes from our BRICS nations, and we really welcome these commitments. We are now starting to convert these pledges into tangible job opportunities, and you'll see that Gauteng will be turned up to be a construction site. We want to thank these institutions for believing in our vision. To raise 320 billion rands is not a child's play, and we know the majority of these institutions wants to relocate to our province and also assist us to eliminate the challenges that we face in terms of unemployment. I said it and I want to restate it, that during the State of the Province address, we indicated crime remains the highest priority that we want to tackle. And we identified 450 criminals that we thought these are the people that are responsible for major crimes in our province. To date, we have managed to nab or arrest almost 150 of these 450 criminals, and the two most wanted criminals that we wanted that are